Welcome to this week's virtual Drasha. This week we have the incredible privilege to begin Chumash Bamidbar and to read Parshas Bamidbar. And of course, when one looks at Parshas Bamidbar, the theme of it is really captured in the opening pasuk of the parsha. Hashem says to Moshe Rabbeinu, this is Parak Aleph Pasuk Beis, chapter 1, verse 2, Se'u esrosh kaladas b'nei Yisrael. Count the Jewish people. Count the Jewish people. Now, why count the Jewish people? Rashi HaKodesh says because counting is a sign of affection. When you care about something, when you love something, Rashi HaKodesh explains you constantly want to count it. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu says to Moshe Rabbeinu, count Klal Yisrael as a display of my divine love, a display of my divine affection. And Moshe Rabbeinu does just that. Each and every tribe is counted. And after the tribes are counted, ultimately again, there's further details about how they're supposed to camp, how they're supposed to travel. Yet interestingly enough, in the midst of all this counting, the Torah says as follows. The Torah says there's one exception, one tribe that is not to be counted. And Torah says over here, this is in Parak Aleph Pasuk Memtes, chapter 1, verse 49. Don't count the tribe of Levi. Don't count the tribe of Levi doesn't get counted within the ranks of Klal Yisrael. Says Rashi HaKadosh, why not? Why not? So Rashi says, Kidaihu ligyon shel melech lios nimna levado. Literally, the legion of the king should be counted on their own. Shevet Levi is considered to be the legion of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Shevet Levi has a unique distinction amongst all of the tribes. Every tribe has a mandate, every tribe has a mission, every tribe has a destiny. Levi's mission, destiny, is to be wholly and solely devoted to the service of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's what Levi does. That's what Levi does, and therefore, Levi is not counted together with all the other tribes. But the Torah then goes on. So what is the unique mission, and wherein lies the unique privilege of Shevet Levi? V'ata hafkeres Leviim, Pasuk Nun, chapter 1, verse 50. V'ata hafkeres Leviim. So I want you to appoint the Leviim, Hashem says to Moshe, to do the following. Am Mishkan ha'edus v'al kol kelev. The Leviim, they're in charge of the Mishkan. They're in charge of the Mishkan, they're in charge of the utensils. Ultimately, again, Hema Yisu es HaMishkan, they are to carry the Mishkan. That's called Kelav, all the utensils. The Hem Yishar Suhu, they'll serve in the Mishkan. The Saviv La Mishkan Yachanu, and they camp around the Mishkan. So essentially, the unique destiny or mission of Shevet Levi is they are solely and wholly devoted to the service and to the care of the Mishkan. That's it. That's it. They're unique, they're separate, they're distinct, and no one else is permitted to engage in this sacred task. But the Torah then goes on and says something very interesting. So again, this is now Parak Aleph Pasuk Nun Aleph, chapter 1, verse 51. Ubin Soah HaMishkan, but when it's time to travel, Yoridu Osoah HaLeviim. The Leviim will take down the Mishkan. Ubechanos HaMishkan, when it's time to camp, Yakimu Osoah HaLeviim. The Leviim will erect the Mishkan. The Azara Karev Yumas, and any non-Kohen who tries to come close and tries to engage in any of these activities ultimately will die. So there's a simple question that's raised on these psukim. So first of all, the Torah already told me that the Leviim take care of everything with the Mishkan. Right? I already know that. You already told me in Pasuk Nun, in verse 50, you told me the Leviim are in charge of the Mishkan, anything to do with the Mishkan, the running of the Mishkan, the traveling, the transport of the Mishkan, which also presumably includes the deconstruction and construction of the Mishkan, ultimately is within the purview of the Leviim. That's their job. That's their job. That's their job. So why do you have to single out? And when they travel, they'll deconstruct it. And when you stop and you camp, they'll reconstruct it. That's understood from the previous pasuk. And there's another question, which if you were writing the verse, if I was writing the pasuk, the way I would have written it, it just seems to appeal, seems to make a little bit more sense to me, is you would write first, Ubechanos HaMishkan, when they would camp, they would erect the structure. When they would camp, they would construct the Mishkan. And then when they would decamp and travel, they would deconstruct the Mishkan. Just logically, it seems to make more sense to talk about constructing the Mishkan first and then deconstructing the Mishkan afterwards. Yet, when the pasuk conveys the information, the pasuk first speaks about deconstructing the Mishkan and only afterwards constructing the Mishkan. So why the reversal of the normative order? And Rav Avram Yitzchak HaKohen Kook says something incredibly beautiful. He addresses really the first question, which is, so why is it that the Torah Kedosha goes out of its way to tell us that it's the job of the Leviim to construct the Mishkan? Right? Why? It's already understood. And Rav Kook says something so beautiful. He says, Yesh avodas Hashem miyuchedes. There is a unique type of service of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Lakachas dvarim mifurakim livnos osam, to take disparate parts and to build them into a cohesive unit. He says, Noim liros davar shalim. It's nice, it's beautiful to see something complete. Aval yesh avoda miyuchedes, lakachas es hamifurak, ulachziro lishtemuso. But there's something really special that when you see a whole bunch of disparate pieces lying around, and you're able to take those pieces and build them into something beautiful, that is the highest level of avodas Hashem. What is Rav Kook trying to teach us? There's a deep message embedded in the deconstruction and reconstruction of the Mishkan. Essentially, if you could imagine for just a moment, the Leviim, right, when they're traveling, they have a whole bunch of pieces. And then HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, okay, you're camping here. So what does Shevet Levi do? Shevet Levi takes a whole bunch of pieces that when you're looking at them, look random. Maybe even don't even look like they fit together, right? They're on a whole bunch of different wagons being carried by a whole bunch of different people, all in Shevet Levi. They look like independent, disparate pieces that don't form a cohesive unit. What does Shevet Levi do? Shevet Levi teaches us how to take independent pieces and make them into a whole. And says Rav Kook, what an incredible metaphor for life. Because sometimes in life, the edifice that we build, the life that we build, the relationships we build, come tumbling down. And when I take like a panoramic view of my life, what I see are a lot of disparate, independent pieces. And I look and I say to myself, I don't know how these things are ever going to fit together. They just don't seem to stem. They just don't seem to go together. And what does Shevet Levi teach us? Shevet Levi teaches us that sometimes the highest calling, the greatest accomplishment in life, is to take all of the broken pieces and to try to build them into a whole. See, dear friends, as we get older, when we see differently, when we're young, we have a whole plan for life, right? Everything is going to go a certain way, and I have a whole timeline, and I have expectations of others, expectations of myself, and I'm so confident that the plan is so good that of course it's all going to fall into place, until it doesn't. And we all have those moments in life where everything comes crumbling down. And the first reaction sometimes, like when you're looking at all the broken pieces of life, is just to throw your hands up and say, I surrender. I can't do this. It's too difficult. And Rav Kook says, Yesh avodas Hashem miyuchedes. You know what the most special type of avodas Hashem is? Lakachas dvarim mifurakim velivnos osam. To take the broken pieces of life and to build them into a whole. That's what Shevet Levi was modeling for us. How to take disparate pieces and build them into a cohesive unit. And if it works for the Mishkan, then we can make that work in our lives. We all have those moments. Everything came tumbling down. And if not everything came tumbling down, one part of the life edifice comes tumbling down. But I think for many of us, at any given moment in life, my life structure is not complete. There are some pieces that are on the ground. And yes, in some of those extreme moments, all of the pieces are scattered everywhere. There's an avoda miyuchadas. There is a unique form of avodas Hashem, to take the broken pieces of your life and to try to figure out how to build them back together again. Now the difference is, in the Mishkan, the pieces always came together perfectly. Sometimes in life the pieces don't come together perfectly. But just because they can't come together perfectly doesn't mean that you can't build something beautiful, even in the aftermath of devastating failure. Because that's what the broken pieces represent. Life failure. Whether it's personalistic failure, whether it's tragic circumstances that made my whole dream feel like a failure, whatever it might be. But often in life, I look the panoramic view of and I see pieces. Yesh avoda miyuchadas. There's a unique avoda to take the pieces of your life and to build them back together. To put them back together. To build a new edifice. To build something beautiful. Often that which you rebuild looks very different than what you had originally, but it's no less beautiful and it's no less magnificent. This was the avoda of Shevet Levi, and this is the avoda ultimately that they teach us how to perform. But there's one more piece. Because remember, as we mentioned before, The order of the pasuk is interesting, right? The Torah says in pasuk Nun Aleph, when we would travel, the Levim would deconstruct, and when we would camp, they would reconstruct. And we mentioned that although it makes sounds logical to say first discuss building and then deconstructing, and perhaps what the Torah is teaching us is another incredible lesson. That there's another avoda miyuchedes, there's another unique avoda. It's not just taking the pieces and building something new, rebuilding something. But sometimes in life you have to find the courage to take what you built and you have to deconstruct it. Because sometimes the life edifice that I built for myself at a certain stage of life no longer works. Sometimes what was good once upon a time ago, what worked, what really legitimately worked, then doesn't work now. And sometimes the truth is, the life edifice that I built in the past, it never really worked. It never worked. But somehow I made it work. In life, a person has to have enough individualistic and personalistic courage to say, you know what? This life structure, this edifice, this mindset, this approach, it doesn't work. It doesn't work. And what does the pasuk say? Ubin soa hamishkan. Sometimes if you want to move yourself forward in life, you know what you have to do? Yoridu oso halaviyim. You have to become a Levi, and you have to learn the art of deconstruction. Shlomo HaMelech says, a beautiful pasuk in Koheles, in the beginning of Perek Gimel, chapter 3, Shlomo HaMelech writes, Eis la'tas ve'eis la'akor natua. There's a time to plant, and there's a time to uproot that which you planted. And if you look at those psukim, right, those are the Eis psukim, a time for this, a time for that. I would have thought he would have written, Eis la'tas, there's a time to plant, ve'eis liktsor, a time to harvest. But that's not what Shlomo says. There's a time to plant, and there's a time to uproot that which you planted, because sometimes in life you plant something, you build something, and then I realize, you know what? It's not the right thing for me, or it's not the right thing for me anymore. And I have to find the courage to deconstruct. How many of us are locked in mindsets that are archaic and outdated? How many of us are locked like in a perspective or in a worldview that maybe served me well once upon a time, but it's not good anymore? How many of us are locked in negative character traits that, again, I've convinced myself this is who I am? Eis latas, there's a time to plant. Ve'eis la'akor natua, there's a time ultimately, again, to uproot that which you planted. Ubin soa hamishkan, sometimes in life, if you want to move yourself forward, yoridu oso, you have to find the courage to deconstruct that which you built. And the pasuk writes deconstruction before construction, because sometimes deconstructing that which you've built in the past is even a higher form of avoda than putting back the disparate pieces together. And as such, if we bring this all together, it turns out that what we always thought was just a simple, innocuous pasuk in the Torah turns out to be a recipe for life success. In order to be successful in the incredible, magnificent, beautiful, and holy journey of life, I have to become a Levi. And to become a Levi, I have to become skilled and versed in two things. Number one, how to take pieces and rebuild them back into one. Life often comes crumbling down right before our eyes. It's easy to stare, to sob, and to lament over the broken pieces. But I'm a Levi. And as a Levi, I could find the courage to take the pieces and put them back together. Part one. Part two, to be a Levi, ubin soa hamishkan, I recognize that sometimes to advance my life agenda, yaridu oso, that which I have built in the past needs to come down. Not because it was always bad, but because it doesn't serve my purposes now. It's holding me back. It's like, it's like the article of clothing that you love so much. The problem is it hasn't fit you for 10 years. You could keep trying to squeeze into it and look ridiculous, or recognize that it's probably better to buy some new clothing that fits who you are now. Sometimes in life we have to learn to uproot that which we have planted. We have to learn how to deconstruct that which we have built in the past to make way for something even better. Wishing everyone a good Erev Shabbos and a beautiful Shabbos Kodesh.